Hi, I am so pleased to be able to speak to Jodie Grant from Melbourne, Australia. Jodie was a contributor to our book, Living Together, Separating, Divorcing, Surviving During a Pandemic. And for those of you who will hopefully get the book and read Jodie's piece, it is on page 90 in the book. Welcome, Jodie. It's a pleasure to speak to you.
Thank you, Michael. It's a pleasure to meet you virtually and get to speak to you.
This is such a curious thing. Here we are. I'm in Florida. You're in Australia, and and we can have this interesting and rich and lovely and useful conversation. So I wonder if you could begin and provide viewers with some background about yourself, about your work. What brings you to the idea that you wanted to contribute to the book? So in terms of your professional experience and background.
Yes, thank you, Michael. We call it a Family Dispute Resolution Practitioner in Australia, or a Family Mediator for you. I came into this space from a background working in homelessness. And one of the things that I discovered in homelessness, working with people who were living on the street, was this incredible energy around conflict. And I loved it. And I wasn't frightened by it, but I loved the opportunity and I loved what was underneath it. And what I discovered in that space was the power of relationships and connections. And I ended up finding myself, I'm not quite sure how I got there, into doing a master's in conflict resolution, specialising in family law. And the more work that I've done in both training but also in practice has all been about connecting with people and relationships and using the power of that connection to actually help people heal and move forward. Social work is about walking with people, working with people. Family mediation is also about walking with people. When I saw your post, and I was so struck by this, what was going on in this pandemic and this sense of fear that was people were experiencing, and I was so conscious of people's roles being really, really blurred. I was really also struck by the fact that people felt disconnected from each other. And if we're talking about healing is often done through relationships. Dan Siegel certainly talks about relationships as a way of healing. And I do a lot of restorative work with people who have experienced abuse and trauma. And what I was struck by was with all of these parallels. And the parallel and the most fundamental concept was about relationships and connections. So I guess why I was drawn to contributing was really about unpacking for people. No one who ever enters into a relationship plans for the end of it. And they certainly don't plan for the conversation about how are we going to continue to stay connected around the people that are most important to us, being our children, when we don't particularly want to sit in the same space or we may not get along. And I think that there are layers of grief and loss in that relationship that often don't get named or explored. And I think for people to move past that, if they're truly seen and they have an opportunity to speak to that, and I'm not talking about venting, I'm talking about be seen, be heard, be acknowledged, then they have more of a capacity to reset their relationship. And I think that notion of grief is something that's lost. And so I really just wanted to speak to that and, acknowledge the parallel processes in terms of the end of a relationship, but also this fundamental grief that the whole world is going through, that we've had this major shift. So, sorry, that's a big explanation. I'm sorry, but they were the kind of threads that I was weaving together, and that's why I felt so drawn to contribute.
Yeah. Jodie, thank you, because what you're talking about is at one level, it's the micro, it's the family and the tearing apart of the relationships that have been built over time in that family, and the loss that people experience, and the grief that they go through, which is compounded, exacerbated by everything else that's going around, including in particular right now, the pandemic.
That's right.
But what you've also talked about, and I wonder, is there a parallel then to sort of what we're experiencing, even if we are in intact relationships, or we're not haven't ever been in a relationship that's coming apart, because of the loss of connectivity that we're experiencing as a result of the lockdown, as a result of our worries about our health, about our security, about our future, about our friends, about our relations.
I think you're right, Michael. I think that this idea of loss is profoundly compounded. I think, you know, when people separate, where they're told that they need to start rebuilding their trust, we're living in a world at the moment where there's a lot of fear, and it's hard to trust people when you're afraid. In the end of a relationship, you're right, we're talking micro and meta things happening at the same time, parallel processes. In order to build people's capacity, they have to feel safe. And so for me, you're right, this is about trying to support people to feel safe, build their capacity. And part of that is acknowledging that grief and that fear, both at an individual level, but also potentially in terms of like wider families and societies and systems. And depending on where you're at, I mean, you might be in an intact family. You might have, sorry, I hate that phrase. You might, but you also might have very different views about, you know, what this pandemic means for you and how to keep safe. And so the conversations around that, and, you know, that sense of, I'm not sure what it's like where you are. Where we are, you can't go up and hug each other anymore. You know, we're wearing face masks, we're in lockdown. You know, that personal contact, that physical connection is something that's become quite scary. So I think we really need to name that grief, that loss. And that is so fundamentally important. You know, you see a lot of people who are in hospitals and you can't touch them physically. We know that with babies, if they're not touched physically, then that has a profound effect on their development and their growth. So I'm just so conscious that there are all these different layers, and I think we need to name them and be aware of them and try new ways to center ourselves and be alert to them.
And I think what I want to ask you about is something that you said, that this isn't mere venting. In other words, that the acknowledgement of the loss and the grieving of the loss, whether it is in the relationship, whether it is in friendships that people you can't connect with anymore, that loss of touch, of being hugged, or even a handshake doesn't happen anymore. People don't get together and have a cup of coffee or a cup of tea.
No.
But just, you're talking about going beyond merely acknowledging that. In other words, that's the first step, right? Is saying,
Yes.
I've experienced a loss. The second part is grieving that loss. And then the third part is doing something about that, right?
That's right. And for me, it's about, you know, a lot of my clients say to me, I haven't felt heard. And I think you truly have to see people, and that's about being curious. It's about wanting to hear. I think once people start venting, then their stress levels escalate and they lose that capacity to think. They lose that connection. They get caught in that primal, you know, emotional explosion, and they're not able to connect the thinking with the emotion. And I do think that capacity to actually really truly feel heard and hear that somebody's interested in you, and people are endlessly fascinating, means that they can actually not only accept that they've been heard, but they're also then more able to hear somebody else. And I do think there's a snowball impact. And part of this is also, I think we all have a responsibility to each other to actually hear and listen and engage. And if we're role modeling this behavior, it's so powerful. It is incredibly powerful if we can connect with people, if we can listen, if we can hear, and then give them the opportunity of passing that on to someone else. It's a true gift.
Yeah. I wonder if you could talk a little bit on a pragmatic level for people reviewing this and are saying, okay, how do I do this listening thing? How does this really happen? What do I need to do? What does the other person need to do? How do I pass this on as if I'm an adult, a parent? How do I pass this on to my children? How do I show this? In other words, can you help translate the ideas into practical action?
I think, look, the best advice I can give around that is to hold on to the curiosity. So what I find is, and I've trained a lot of mediators, and so I'm teaching them these skills. People are so busy planning their responses to what's being said that they forget to actually listen. So slowing things down where you're actually not just saying, I hear you're saying, right, but you're asking some questions. Help me to understand what it is to be you. I can never walk a mile in your shoes. I can never understand your experience. What I would like, though, is to understand what's important to you. What is it that it's important that I understand? And then let me check that I've understood it step by step. And then if I haven't got it, please tell me what I haven't got, because I really do want to get this. It's really important that I understand this. Well, not understand it, because like I said, you can never understand it. But I want to get as much as it is. So people talk a lot about empathy and they talk a lot about pity and sympathy and those kind of concepts. For me, it's about compassion. I want to demonstrate compassion. I'm interested. I want to hear it. I'm not planning my response. I'm too busy focused on what is it that you're trying to say to me. So I'm focused on them rather than focused on me. And I think a lot of the time we focus on, creating a witty, crafty, clever little response. And, I want to sound good. I want to create a sound bite. I think we need to get rid of that. I think we need to really think about what is it this person is truly saying. And if I don't understand it, then I need to ask a question to unpack that a little bit further.
So that's what
Does that make sense?
Yes, and I was trying to imagine this, hypothetical. If I am a spouse in a relationship that's ending,
yes,
without regard to whether it's clearly mutual or one person's decision that the other person is learning to understand and accept. Put that part aside. Because even if I think it's exactly the right thing to do, I'm hurt.
yes.
I am going to lose something that I cherished at one time. And how am I going to sit with the fact that I'm hurt, I'm bitter, I'm scared, whatever the emotions, and actually listen to somebody else? How do I do that so that what you're describing actually occurs, namely that I really listen to what the other person is saying, not plan my response and thinking, you think you got it bad? Let me tell you how awful it is for me.
Again, bit of the $1 million question. I think part of it is for us as practitioners to demonstrate what that looks like and for them to have the experience of feeling heard and the power of feeling heard and acknowledged. It's also about people understanding that it's not just about you telling the other person what they've done wrong. It's about you understanding the impact of your behaviour on them. So if you're saying something that is provocative, people generally know when they're pushing the other person's buttons. And sometimes it's about having a conversation. Okay, well, where do you think that's going to lead you? And how do you think that's going to play out? So sometimes it's about role playing. And sometimes it's about naming, okay, well, this is the experience that you're saying. It's not me saying, I can hear you feel bitter. It's helping the person to actually identify the emotions themselves, because it's far more powerful if they're able to name them, and they're able to reduce their stress levels by naming them. It's creating a safe place where they can do that, and not, not judgment, but also helping them to understand that if you want to be heard, then you have to be able to listen to the other person, and really appealing to their interests in terms of, your kids need you to do this. Your kids need you to become that better parent. Your kids need you to be able to step above this. And that's a big ask at the moment.
Right.
And I know I'm asking a lot from you. And maybe you need to still continue to have this conversation in a therapeutic framework. I don't know that that other person is going to want to hear this. And I don't know that they're going to give you the answers that you want. And I don't know whether they're ever going to be able to explain well enough to you about the reasons why they made the decision that they made, because you may have never made this decision. So it's, do you want an explanation? And then it's, what are you going to do with the explanation? So sometimes it's about exploring that, what's going to be good enough for you? Is there ever going to be anything? And if it is, how are you going to manage it? And if it's not, how are you going to manage it? So it's that really gentle exploration, and also making sure that they're not feeling shamed. I think we forget about face-saving strategies. I think people are far more able to speak freely and be raw if they're not feeling they're going to be judged, or if they can say something and rethink it. And what do you think the other person would hear from that? What do you think your kids would hear if they saw you speaking that way? What do you want them to hear? What do you want them to say? How do you want them to manage relationships? What messages can you give them about how to handle this? And I'm not saying that this is good, and I'm not saying this is fine. It's crap. It is.
Yes, but one of the things that you're describing, it seems to, here's where what I was also thinking, Jodie, is that if I, as a parent, can figure out in a really difficult situation how to be able to listen to my partner, and how to talk in a way that my partner can listen to me. It, as you just said, it provides an example for my children, because they will watch and learn from that. And an even more powerful way that the children will learn is if I take that lesson and I apply it in my interactions with them. So
Yes.
they come to me and they're talking about what they're afraid of. Are you able to see my friends again? Will I still go to the same school? Where are we going to live? Are we going to have enough money? What about this? What about grandma and grandpa? All of those kinds of things. That the ability to listen as an adult between two adults, then you take that ability and give it to that child and pay attention to that child. Be a very, very powerful tool as well.
Incredibly powerful. And what I'm also talking about is building the parental alliance. So building the parental capacity and their reflective capacity to think about how they're parenting and the impact of that, but also their alliance. How do you want to build some emotional scaffolding around your children to protect them? I'm very conscious we are incredibly privileged to have a brief window into people's lives. We only ever see the tip of the iceberg. People only choose a little bit. You don't know the traumas in people's past. You don't know what they're bringing with them. You don't know what's going on. You know what they choose to share with you. And I assume there's a lot more going on. People aren't empty vessels. They carry a whole history with them. And I don't expect them to tell me all about it. And it's actually not necessary for me to know. I guess my emphasis is really about people having a safe place where they feel held, they feel contained, where they're understanding how they deal with conflict, where I'm helping them build communication skills, because I do think that, you know, increasingly people aren't taught how to parent, and they're kind of trying to work it out along the way, and each child is unique and each parent is unique and the relationship is unique. And, you know, there are layers upon layers that we're trying to work out, and the subtle nuances of a parent actually saying to a child, this is very frightening. We will work out a pathway together. This is not what I thought we'd end up. This is not the space where I thought we'd be. You know, we talk a lot about unprecedented times. You know, we live in a world that is transformative constantly, that changes constantly. We need predictability, we need consistency, we need certainty. That doesn't mean we need rigidity. You know, Norman Deutsch talked a lot about the brain being, you know, not a rigid computer, but actually being something that could change and transform. And I think we need to see increasingly the world as something that does shift and does move, and that doesn't have to be scary and frightening. It's about, okay, well, what consistency and routine and predictability can I put around myself? And I think particularly now, parents really need to have those conversations and think about it. Also have the conversations with their children, because children can contribute in a really meaningful, helpful way. Parents don't need to solve everything, and they can also say to their children, I don't know. I'm uncertain. And you know, that's a huge lesson for children to see, that parents will work that out and be comfortable in that space. We don't have to be, well, I have all the answers. You don't. And that's okay. So I think there are some real complexities to this world that we're experiencing at the moment. I think the themes around grief and loss are really quite profound, and I think that if we don't really open them up and at least accept that they're there and consider them, then we're really going to find ourselves unable to move forward. Not only in terms of, you know, families that are together, but also families that are not.
Jodie, this has been the most wonderful conversation with you. Thank you for sharing your thoughts, your experience, your hopes for people, your aspirations for what's possible, even in the face of grief and loss. It's quite remarkable. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael, for the opportunity.
And for those watching, at the end of this video, we will provide additional information for how you can learn more about Jodie and her work, and how to get in contact with her, and also more about our book, what it's about, and where to get a hold of it and read about it. So for now, and just for this time only. So thank you, Jodie. I look forward to the next time. I know that there will be. Thanks again.
Thank you, Michael.